The media is attacked by the right and the left. Facebook tries to figure out what to do about fake news, and many just want news they agree with. The Chargers are 4-6. The Padres were last in the NL West. What in the sports world is going on here? And both the San Diego Opera and Symphony are finding new ways to reach audiences. I'm Mark Sauer. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer, and joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today are Matthew Hall, Editorial and Opinion Director at the UT, San Diego Union Tribune. Hi, Matt.
How you doing, Mark?
Good to have you back today. Gina Liu, Journalism Professor at the University of San Diego. Hi, Gina.
Hi, Mark.
Glad you're here today. Jay Paris, sports writer and author of Game of My Life Chargers. Hi, Jay.
Mark, thanks for having me.
Good to have you here. And Nina Guerin, arts producer for KPBS News. Hi, Nina.
Hello.
Well, here are some headlines for you. The Pope endorses Donald Trump. Hillary Clinton sold weapons to ISIS. A key FBI agent investigating her emails turns up dead. Those protesting Trump's election are paid professionals. I'm sure you've guessed by now that these are fake headlines, and fake news and outright lies permeated the 2016 presidential campaign and countless bogus stories put forth in the internet for profit, partisanship, and of course on social media. Matt, this is kind of new yellow journalism, which we heard about way back when with Hearst and a century ago. The president's talked about it post-election. It's become a big story here lately. What is going on here? Even Facebook is doing some soul searching. Yeah,
Facebook and Google actually both made news after the election, which is, of course, worth noting, that they will try to take some of the advertising off-site of these fake news sites, right? So they are trying to identify an issue that certainly surfaced during this campaign. Mm-hmm. What's interesting to note is that after the last election, the 2012 election, is when Facebook first put its share button on mobile devices. Mm-hmm. Fast forward 4 years from now, it's so easy to share fake news on your cell phone, on your desktop. People are doing it. You mentioned some of the headlines. Mm-hmm. There's many examples, but I think it's a symptom of a broader problem, a broader malady, which is people don't necessarily trust journalism the way that they did. And so this is one issue that we need to tackle with as an industry, as individuals. Right, and we're going to get into all of that. I wanted to ask everyone here, of course, we've all worked in journalism for a long time here. The media site BuzzFeed did a study here, right, at the time of the election. They took 20 fake election stories on Facebook, and nearly all were pro-Trump or anti-Clinton among those stories. They were shared 8.7 million times. They compared that to the top 20 election stories that were shared from mainstream media sources, only 7.4 million shares. So the fake news is actually more popular and going that way. Gina, is this the profit motive that Matt was alluding to?
I think what you're seeing when I talk to my students and I ask them, do you know it's fake news? They do know it's fake news, but I think what we have to remember is everything is so easy right now on social media. It's instantaneous. You can send it. And in the older days, and we can think of our parents saying this, we used to sit around the water cooler the next day. Hey, what's happening? What are we talking about? This is their way of talking to one another right now. They know it's interesting. They think it's interesting. They know it's outrageous. They want to see what these other people are saying, and then they just send it on.
Well, that's a really interesting point you make, because in the water cooler, you really didn't know where everybody stood, and maybe you'd get some pushback or some diverse ideas. Here, we're kind of siloed. You know you're sending it to people who agree with you, whether you're on the right or the left, right?
Yeah, no, that's true. I think it was the Wall Street Journal that created kind of like a stereotypical conservatives Facebook feed and then a liberals Facebook feed, and they're completely different, right? So we're self-selecting our news or being fed news by Facebook's algorithms. So that's one issue. And there's a spectrum of news, right? So it's from a small paper to the New York Times. That's one way to kind of carve up news. There's also sites like Breitbart that kind of target conservatives, to MSNBC. So what we're seeing basically is this rift in TV news that has been going on for decades is now kind of working its way through online media. And I think it's really a question of media literacy. Gina raises a good point, which is that we really got to teach students to differentiate between fake news, quote unquote, which means we have to define fake news, and then real news.
Well, let's talk about that. Go ahead. You want to pick up on that?
Well, I just wanted to say one of the things, and I think that we're guilty of as journalists, and we've all been there, we have now gotten to the point where it's a spectator sport. We have not done our jobs in informing. It has to be interesting. We have the celebrity aspect of it with Donald Trump, and we have to show conflict. And in the old days, we just showed the facts. We gave them the facts, and then the citizen made up his or her mind. And we have to remember how we're presenting it, either through a conservative lens, a liberal lens, or a satirical lens. And I think that students know this, but people are going to where they want to be entertained. And I think as journalists, we have to go back to the basics and say, look, here's the information. It may not be exciting, but here's the straight information. Now choose. And as Matt said, now people are going to points that will validate them rather than inform them. And I think that's scary.
Well, and misinform here. I want to go to Donald Trump, of course, the president-elect of this country right now. For 6 years, he championed a lie. He said the President of the United States, Barack Obama, was not born in the United States. An enormous amount of people believe that. A poll after poll showed that, and still do, as a matter of fact. Here, he's gone and tweeted out demonstrably false things right up until this week, and he keeps doing that. He gets away with it. It works. Why is that?
Well, I do think it comes back to media literacy, right? People don't take the time to understand what is truth. You know, a respectable journalism outlet will use respectable sources, will link to other news outlets, and so it becomes this kind of constellation of facts. And another site may not do that. And to pick up on a point, Gina, it sounds like your students know media literacy, but actually, I think because you probably teach them very well, but many don't.
You're right.
This is a good
You're
week for this conversation
right. Yes,
because there's a Stanford University study that just came out that says students can't differentiate between a news article and sponsored content. If you show them a news article on climate change and something that Shell, for example, is the example that they use, that Shell paid for, they're not going to really know which to trust. And that is a big, big problem.
Well, yeah, you look at it on a legitimate-looking website here, and it could be the New York Times, it could be a fake news site, and they kind of look the same, don't they?
Well, if you look at how journalists have been doing their jobs, we've had people who have public relations agencies who have put together video news releases, and they look, sound, as though it's a real story, and they've been creeping into the newscast. So this is something that a lot of people, they can't make the difference between what is actual news and what is fake, and sometimes the people who are the journalists don't care. And I think what you're seeing is, you know, they're downsizing their newsrooms, they still have to feed the beast. You still have to get stories out there. And sometimes conflict is a lot easier to cover, even if it's not real, if people are talking about it. And it goes to your question, Matt, what is news? Is it what people are talking about, or is it what you should know? And that's something that we have to go back to, basics on that.
Jay?
And really, it's been around for a while. I mean, we've all seen the National Enquirer, you know, aliens land on the front yard or something.
Right, and people would chuckle as they got through the news line, and everybody understood that,
But it seems like that's been lost in all this. And it's you know, like us, you know, the editors, you know, get it first, but first get it right. And you don't hear that anymore.
I mean, it comes down to intention, right? Like the Onion, clear satire. Most people who share that realize that. But then some other sites maybe are less so. That maybe they're agenda-driven, but they're not pointedly satire, or they bury the disclaimer that this is fantasy news or not real news, you know. So
and as you said at the outset, they're making money with clicks, or they had been, because there's a little bit of advertising every time somebody shares that and brings some eyeballs. I want to shift gears a little bit. How much media responsibility early on, when Donald Trump was rising and a lot of people gave him zero chance, but I think he recognized presidential politics is really a reality game show these days. How much of the media was responsible for that, some estimate, billion or more free advertising, and didn't really call this all out at the beginning?
I think they were very responsible. I think one of the things that the head of CBS said, Les Moonves, he said regarding Trump, he may not be good for America, but he's damn good for CBS. And he would say things that people would, hey, what did he say today? What's happening now? They're so outrageous, but it was entertainment. And nobody called him on it from the very beginning. And I think that was really a big problem. And then by the time they wanted to go after him, he had already gotten all this exposure and believability. And because of the believability, he had credibility from a large segment of the population.
All right, I want to turn it around to the audience now a little bit. Many Americans simply really don't care about the mendacity of their candidate. I think we learned that. Can we call that willful ignorance? And what can the mainstream media do to combat this?
Well, I think this is an unusual election. I mean, Trump knew how to manipulate the media, not in a negative sense, but in literal manipulation, to move them around, to get his message out there. And there was a very receptive audience to that. A lot of people feeling left out or left behind in this country. But I do think that we need to, as an industry, again, as individuals, do some self-reflection, try to think about how to get our news stories out there, to find our audience, to be kind of, you know, another way to frame this conversation about fake news is what's real news. How do we decide that? Let's decide that, and then get that in front of our readers and our listeners and our viewers. It seemed,
though, for decades we had a real understanding of what real news was and what mainstream outlets were, and as Jay was pointing out, what supermarket tabloids were, and it's all kind of blurred now.
Well, that was when there was 3 TV networks,
right. That's exactly
several
right.
major national papers,
Right. And now there's a zillion websites, and so it's incumbent on the journalist and the consumer to figure out kind of what they want and whether that's truth. I mean, this is nothing new. Truthiness was something that Stephen Colbert talked about in the last election cycle.
And Hearst and yellow journalism, as I said at the outset, have been around for over a century. You know, many people said we went into a war with Spain based on pushing it from a newspaper back in those days. Gina?
Well, one of the things I would like to ask Matt, you see that Trump invited a few people to the Trump Towers to talk about what's going on, but it was an off-the-record discussion.
Yeah, how was that allowed?
That was problematic.
How was that allowed?
We're a democracy. We're the fourth estate. We're the watchdog. How does that happen?
I should point out, those were TV people. The print people in the New York Times insisted it was on the record today.
And the New York Times this week, they live tweeted this interview. And so as it was unfolding, people could watch the questions that were being asked, see Trump's answers. The only way that you could get access to the off-the-record conversation was by people leaking it, which helps Trump's narrative that the media is
dishonest because they agreed not to leak it.
So I mean, you have to ask those TV executives and those TV personalities why those ground rules were agreed to. Clearly, the New York Times drew a line in the sand, stuck to their guns.
And it should be.
And he hasn't had a press conference since July.
Well, he had that videotape.
Yeah.
See, that's a problem,
there you go.
right?
Right, and it's up to journalists to call them out. All right, we have plenty more to talk about this, and we will as we go forward on this show, but we are going to change our topic now. Well, the Chargers' dream of a new stadium downtown, paid for by taxes on tourists, got spiked on Election Day. The team's fourth quarter bumbling this season did a little to help the cause. The San Diego Padres, meanwhile, finished another dismal campaign in their still impressive 12-year-old new downtown stadium. Well, 12-year-old, that is, downtown stadium. And that was approved by the voters flush from a 1998 World Series appearance. Jay, I want to start with that whole notion there. How much does on-the-field success translate to support for putting public dollars into one of these stadiums?
Well, everybody likes to jump aboard a bandwagon. Everybody likes to go with a winner. And if you can associate yourself with that winning team, it makes you feel better. I think where the Padres did hit a home run, if you will, they did have a good team that year. They went to the World Series, which they don't do a lot of.
And the vote was great timing, like 2 weeks after.
It was great timing, but you also have to look at the blueprint and the template and how the Padres went about it. Larry Lucchino, very active in the community. John Morris, who's not a big red light camera guy, he's not out there much, but for this he was.
The owner back then, of course, yeah.
Yeah, sorry. And they got everybody together before they presented it. They had that consensus was already built, where with the Chargers one, it seemed like, well, here's what we've written up, and we hope the mayor gets on board, and we're looking for the hotelers and maybe these guys. Where the Padres had everybody, pulling the rope in the same direction when they presented it to the public.
And they had a definite place and idea. The Padres have been all over the place, North County, South, floating stadiums, Mission Valley, downtown. It's 10 years of, wow, what's going on?
10 years of what's going on, but I think the message is pretty clear that the taxpayers don't have an appetite to pay for it.
Right.
And I think
and that's changed since the Padres were successful at the polls.
The dollars have changed too. Petco Park, I think it was $650 million or something like that. We're talking about a $2 billion complex now with the car elevators and everything for the.
I disagree that the public won't accept public money for a stadium. Clearly, many people draw the line and say we don't want to do that.
Right.
But 43%, all the faults of this plan. This is a one-sided bad plan in a place
That's who
uptown
voted for Measure C, 43%.
Don't necessarily, in a place that could have a better option for land use, and 43% of the city said, you know what, I'm in. I will support
Or was
that.
that vote inclination that maybe we can try something down the road? I'm going to give you my support. We know this isn't going to pass. You know, that those polls are never wrong, right? The presidential election.
When you had to get to 2/3, they're not that wrong.
Right, exactly. So was some of that vote a support vote, knowing that this isn't going to pass, so I'm not have to worry about this, but maybe they can circle back and reload and try again.
Gina?
Well, I'm just wondering, you're talking about when the Padres went for their stadium, and you're right. We went to the World Series. The entire town was behind them.
Exciting team, yeah.
So I'm wondering, and I'm not a sports expert, the win-loss column for the Chargers, they didn't have the fans behind them, really.
No,
and how much was it because of the win-loss?
And they've been to one Super Bowl in half a century.
Right.
I mean, is there a kind of a good riddance atmosphere?
To a degree, and it's been a franchise that, you know, you got to put a good product out on the field. And the Spanos family bought the franchise in 1984. Since then, they've had one streak of 9 straight years of not making the playoffs. They had another streak, 8 straight years of not making the playoffs. It doesn't look like they'll make it this year. That's 6 out of the last 7 years with a quarterback the caliber of Phillip Rivers.
Right.
So, you know, when you're asking people to invest more and more into a product, they're saying, wait a second, you know, you got to give me something coming back as well, and I think that comes into play.
And yet they're staying with the coach and the GM, apparently. They did fire a coach here who had won, I think, 13 games, Marty Schottenheimer, 1 year.
14-2, right.
You're gone,
Yeah.
14-2. And these folks, they're standing by it. I mean, what's the message there?
The message there is that maybe mediocrity is okay, because in a lot of cities and a lot of football teams, if you go 4-12, you're usually not around the next year. Mike McCoy, this is his 4th year. They were in last place last year, last place this year, and 2 third-place finishes. You know, I'm not sure that's what he said he was going to do in his interview when he got the job.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the Padres here.
Yeah.
Still, dismal recent success on the field for that team, despite the excitement in '98 here. They had a season in turmoil at the end of the year. Tell us what happened with the GM and the front office.
Yeah, A.J. Preller, the general manager, was reprimanded and suspended 30 days.
Pretty unusual.
From Major League Baseball, very unusual for cooking the books, if you will, having 2 sets of books on the medical files of players. And that's a line that's usually not crossed with GMs, and you're going to have frontier justice on top of that 30-day suspension, because it's like buying a used car from a guy who got popped for spinning the odometers.
Right.
Maybe you'll go buy one, but you're going to be darn sure. So that was A.J. Preller had a suspension. Then Mike D, the CEO of the organization who oversaw everything, he was let go as well. Not long after Pete Seidler, the owner, said he's here for as long as he wants to be. So front office is a little shaky. And on the field, 6 straight losing season as they continue.
Speaks for itself.
Yeah, that kind of.
The manager's still there.
Manager's still there, and it's a young team, and they're going to try to draft and develop and see. Hopefully, some of these young guys come through for them. It's going to be a little salty down there.
But baseball fans watching the playoffs, you saw some Padre players who came up with the team. They're all over the place playing in the postseason.
Yeah, Chicago Cubs in particular with Anthony Rizzo, and you look around at the managers, Bruce Bochy, we certainly know what he's done up in San Francisco. So. San Diego, it seems like it's a place where players are raised and they go on to be stars elsewhere.
Let's not forget Dave Roberts.
That's right, Doc
with
Roberts.
The Dodgers,
who
right?
couldn't even get
an interview with the Padres.
Named Manager of the Year up north with the hated Dodgers. What about attendance? Have the Padres suffered?
It slipped a little, and that's very rare in a season in which you have the All-Star game, which they did, and usually you can get some more fannies in the seats, as they say, because people want that All-Star ticket. But Petco Park is so much fun to go to, and it's such a shame that a good team isn't on that field, because this is such a baseball hotbed. I mean, just look at the colleges, the high school, the people we produce that go on to the pros. So if they ever could get it right, it'd be a lot of fun down there.
What about next year? As we sit here in winter time, is it going to be exciting next spring?
I would think the slogan would be "Embrace the process." You hear that a lot around down in Petco. Embrace the process of watching these young guys grow, and maybe someday they can be where the Chicago Cubs are. But it's going to be
with the Chicago Cubs.
or traded to the Chicago Cubs. But it's going to be a slow grow. The next 2-3 years, they've they had that big splash a few years ago.
Right.
Where they
tried to do it at once.
Right. Signed some guys with some stats on their baseball cards, but now that's all gone. It's all going to be youth, and they're hoping what they've planted blossoms into something.
All right. Well, speaking of box office, we're going to talk about some other folks trying to sell tickets here in San Diego. Almost 3 years ago, the San Diego Opera was preparing to bring the curtain down for good. But after a rescue by dedicated patrons, the hiring of a new general director, we've got some stability back with the opera. And now they're reaching out to new audiences, and they're not alone. The San Diego Symphony is also on the hunt for new people to fill their seats. Nina, let's start with why it's important for the opera and the symphony to go after these new audiences.
Well, the opera and the symphony, their audiences, we can say, are aging, and they need to keep people subscribing. They need to keep people in the seats, and the community's changing. So it's important to kind of adapt to that new community.
All right. So what are some of the things with the opera and the symphony? What are they trying to do specifically to attract new
So they're
audience?
actually spreading the word with free community performances. Just recently, the San Diego Opera took a English version of Cinderella, and they put it on the trolley tracks, and people could come to certain trolley stops and watch kind of a bridge version of Cinderella.
Pretty well received?
It was very well received. The opera said that they had about 70% new people coming to see those, and then they offered very deep discounts for families, and they saw lots of children in the audiences, and people definitely taking advantage of these new pricing, and they're going to keep it. It was only supposed to be for Cinderella, but now the opera is going to keep it for the whole season because it worked so well.
And so you've seen the symphony do similar things, a big kickoff party, and the Old Globe, free Shakespeare stuff at various community centers.
Symphony had a summer free concert, and the Old Globe just finished doing Shakespeare in places like seniors centers. They went to the prison. They go to libraries, just places where maybe people think that they can't afford to go to the theater and they don't get that opportunity. They took it to these audiences, and that was also really well received.
Jay, big sports fan. Do you go to the opera and the symphony much?
You know, Phantom of the Opera, I saw that once. It wasn't Paris, right? The Opera House was in Paris. I think the big key here is making it more affordable.
Yeah.
And reaching out to families and try to expose those youngins to some culture and some arts and theater and make it affordable. But that's coming from somebody who sees people pay $150 to go to a football game. So,
No, there were a lot which we talked on this show as the opera was going through their financial struggles and all about different programs and diversifying. What are they doing in that regard?
Well, speaking of lower ticket prices, the opera just did Soldier Song, and that was an opera that looked at the price of war on an individual, and they put that in a smaller place. You know, they didn't get the giant Civic Theater. They put it in the Balboa Theater, and ticket prices were much lower, and it was aimed at veterans and military members.
And we've got a bite from David Bennett, the director, about that. Let's hear that.
I think first that opera can be expressed in a lot of ways. That opera can break some of the preconceived barriers to opera for some audience members, maybe that haven't attended, and think, oh, this is a different kind of experience than I imagined, that it's dramatically compelling and engaging. But also that opera can be very immediate, and that it can tell our stories, not stories of other people or other generations or other cultures, but really tell our stories and reach us in very profound ways.
And how's the opera doing now with the new director in place?
They're operating much more smart. Is that smarter?
Lean and mean now?
Lean and mean. They are doing these smaller shows. For Cinderella, they hired American singers instead of bringing in these internationally renowned Italian singers.
Expensive singers,
yes,
it sounds like.
They brought in some Americans, and they did a wonderful job. And people are now talking about the opera as something to do, and it's not just, the opening night gala crowd.
And the symphony also, they're trying to attract new and younger patrons. We got a spot here on what they're doing. Let's hear that.
Inspiration. It's what unites us as Americans, from small towns to big cities. It's found in the freedom we cherish and those who defend it, embedded in our diversity, our triumphs, and in the challenges that bind us together. Its soundtrack is our collective story, told through the music of artists inspired by America. From Hollywood to hip-hop and jazz, this January, San Diegans will gather to celebrate our American music.
All right, for our radio listeners, we had a lot of visuals there talking about that inspiration and also obviously aiming at a younger audience.
Yeah, it's a gorgeous commercial. It has photos from the past, Jackie Kennedy, MLK, and it's interspersed with these gorgeous images of people in a convertible with the American flag floating behind them. So they're just trying to send a message that we are all fans of music. It brings us together, and they can celebrate music that's, jazz, hip hop, classical. We can all find something that we like at the Symphony is kind of the message.
All right, short time left. It's not just the Opera and Symphony. La Jolla Playhouse is doing some things. We mentioned the Globe. These arts groups realize they've just got to broaden their audience.
Yeah, they need to know their audiences. The demographics are changing. La Jolla Playhouse is doing plays for Asian Americans. There's one right now about immigration, and I think that San Diego is doing a good job of trying to see who's out there.
And when will we kind of see this reflected in audience expansion and ticket sales and all of that?
Well, hopefully we're seeing it now. The Symphony said it had its best summer pops ever because they had a lot of pop music and Broadway. And the opera said it's seeing more people, and it's just these new plays are bringing audiences that haven't usually gone to the theater before.
Okay. So, Jay, you're going to get out and buy a ticket then?
Yeah, I'm usually a Grateful Dead guy, but
Tommy maybe would get you.
I'll pitch in. Yeah, the Who works for me.
Okay, all right. Well, that does, we are out of time. That does wrap up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, Matthew Hall of the San Diego Union-Tribune, Gina Liu of the University of San Diego, sports writer and author Jay Paris, and Nina Guerin of KPBS News. A reminder, all the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.